I want you to think about the worst phone call you have ever received. The kind where you are standing in a completely ordinary moment, making coffee, folding laundry, sitting in traffic, and then your phone rings. And in the next 30 seconds, the ordinary moment is gone, and everything is before and after. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning in March. It was my son's school nurse. She said, "Mrs. Elise, we need you to come in right away. Mateo collapsed during gym class. The ambulance is already here." I was in my car before she finished the sentence. What followed was the most terrifying 3 weeks of my life. Doctors and tests and words I had to ask to be repeated because my brain could not hold them. A diagnosis that required treatment. A treatment that required money. A specific number, $7,500 that our insurance would not cover and that we needed to find within 2 weeks. I called my husband from the hospital hallway. He said, "Wandy, we do not have that kind of money right now." 3 weeks later, I found a folder in the bottom of our home office drawer. Closing documents. A beach house in Florida, purchased in his name, signed the same week our son collapsed. My name is Wandy Elias. I am 29 years old, and what I did after I found that folder is the story I am going to tell you today. Stay with me. Welcome to Truth Hardy Stories. This is the channel where real women share the stories they were never supposed to tell. If this is your first time here, make sure you subscribe, because every story we share will stay with you long after it ends. Now, let us get back to where we were. Let me tell you about the life I thought I had before that Tuesday morning in March. My husband, Derek Elias, and I met when I was 22. He was 25. We were at a mutual friend's birthday in Miami, where I grew up, and he was funny and charming and attentive in a way that I mistook for depth. It took me 7 years to understand the difference between a man who pays attention because he is genuinely interested and a man who pays attention because it gets him what he wants. Derek was the second kind. But I did not know that yet at 22. At 22, I saw a confident man with a good job and a warm smile and the ability to make a room laugh. We dated for 2 years. We got married when I was 24. And 11 months after our wedding, Mateo was born. Mateo. I need to tell you about Mateo because he is the center of the story and he deserves to be described properly. He was 6 years old when he collapsed in that gym class. He is 7 now. He is the kind of child who makes you understand, in a way nothing else ever quite managed, what love actually means. He has his father's dark eyes and my mother's laugh, and this way of asking questions about the world that stops me in my tracks sometimes. Why is the sky blue in the day and black at night? Why do dogs always seem happy? Why do some people have more than others? He asks that last one sometimes, and I do not always know how to answer it, especially now. Our life looked fine from the outside. We had a house in Charlotte, North Carolina. Derek worked in commercial real estate. I worked part-time as a dental assistant and handled most of the parenting and household management. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. Or I believed we were comfortable, which turned out to be two very different things. Derek handled the finances. He always had. Early in our marriage, I had suggested we manage money together, set up a shared system. But he said he found it stressful when I second-guessed his decisions, and I did not want to cause friction. So I let it go. I trusted him. That trust was the most expensive mistake I ever made. I got to the school in 11 minutes. They had already taken Mateo in the ambulance by the time I arrived, and a teacher handed me the hospital name, and I drove there with my hands shaking on the wheel, and my mind doing the thing minds do in a crisis, running through every worst possibility in a loop that I could not stop. At the hospital, they stabilized him and ran tests, and then a doctor sat across from me in a small room with chairs and a box of tissues on the table and told me that Mateo had a heart condition. Not the most severe kind, not immediately life-threatening in the way I had feared in the ambulance, but serious, requiring treatment, requiring a procedure that would address the issue before it became the more serious kind. She explained the procedure. She explained the timeline. She was kind and clear, and I understood about 60% of what she said and nodded at the rest. Then she handed me a document that included the cost breakdown. The procedure itself was covered by our insurance. The specific medication protocol required before and after the procedure was not. $7,500. I looked at the number on that page, and I felt something cold move through me that was separate from the fear about Mateo. A different kind of fear. The kind that lives in the gap between what you need and what you have. I called Derek from the hallway outside Mateo's room. He answered on the third ring. I told him everything. The diagnosis, the procedure, the medication protocol. I told him the number. $7,500. I told him the timeline. 2 weeks before the procedure needed to begin. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Wandy, we do not have that kind of money right now." I said, "Derek, this is for Mateo." He said, "I know. I am just saying the cash is not there right now. We will figure something out." I said, "What does figure something out mean? Our son needs this medication in 2 weeks." He said, "I hear you. Let me look at things and I will call you back." He called back 3 hours later with the suggestion that I apply for a medical payment plan through the hospital and look into a medical credit card. I sat in the chair next to Mateo's hospital bed that night, and I listened to my son breathing. And I looked at my phone and I thought about what Derek had said. And something felt wrong in a way I could not name yet. Not wrong about Mateo. Wrong about Derek. I want to be clear about what happened in the 10 days after that phone call with Derek. I found the money myself. Not quickly. Not easily. But I found it. I called my mother in Miami. She gave me $800 without hesitation and apologized that it was not more. I called my best friend Camille, who organized a GoFundMe that raised $2,300 in 4 days from people I had not spoken to in years, people who had known Mateo as a baby, people who were strangers, who had seen the post and shared it. I applied for a medical financial assistance program through the hospital and qualified for a partial grant of $1,700. I put the remaining $2,700 on a credit card in my own name. 10 days, $7,500, found, organized, and paid without a single dollar from Derek. Derek came to the hospital twice during those 10 days. He brought Mateo a toy car the first time and a milkshake the second time, and he sat in the chair beside the bed and talked to Mateo about baseball. And he seemed like a father who was present and loving and doing his best. He never once asked me how the money situation was resolving. He never offered to help look. He never suggested we sell something or borrow from his own family or do any of the 100 things a person does when they are genuinely trying. I noticed that. I filed it away in the part of me that was too exhausted and too focused on Mateo to examine it properly yet. The procedure went well. Mateo came home on a Thursday afternoon with a bag of medications and strict instructions and a sticker on his hand that the nurse had given him for being, in her words, the bravest 7-year-old she had ever met. He held my hand in the back seat, all the way home. I drove with one hand on the wheel and tears running down my face that I did not try to stop. He was going to be okay. My son was going to be okay. It was 3 days later that I found the folder. It was a Sunday. Mateo was napping. Derek was out. He had said he had a work thing, which he said often enough that it had long since stopped registering as notable. I was in the home office looking for our insurance documents because I needed to file additional paperwork from the hospital. The insurance documents were in the top drawer, where they always were. But the drawer stuck when I tried to close it, and I had to clear some things out to fix it. And in doing that, I pulled out a stack of folders from the bottom of the drawer that I had not looked through in months. The third folder in the stack had a label on it in Derek's handwriting. It said Sunset Beach. I do not know why I opened it. I was not looking for anything. I was not suspicious in any focused way. I just opened it. Inside were closing documents for a property purchase. A beach house in Clearwater, Florida. 3 bedrooms, a deck facing the water. Purchase price listed clearly at the top of the first page. Signed and dated. I looked at the date. The closing had happened on a Tuesday. I went back through my memory. Which Tuesday? I counted backward. It was the Tuesday of the week Mateo collapsed. The same week I had called Derek from a hospital hallway and said, "My son needs $7,500. And he had said, "We do not have that kind of money right now." The same week. I sat on the floor of the home office. I held the folder in my lap. I sat there for a very long time. I did not confront Derek that night. I know that might surprise you. I know the version of this story where I call him immediately, where I scream, where I throw the folder at him when he walks through the door. And I understand why that feels like the natural response. But I sat on that office floor and I made a decision that I think was the most important decision I have ever made. I decided to know everything before I said anything. I put the folder back exactly where I had found it. I fixed the drawer. I went and checked on Mateo, who was still sleeping, with his hand curled under his chin the way he always slept. I made myself a cup of tea. And I sat at the kitchen table and I thought very carefully. The beach house had been purchased in his name. I needed to understand what that meant legally. I needed to understand what our financial situation actually was. The real version, not the version Derek had presented to me for 5 years. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made a single move. I called Camille that evening, after Derek was asleep. I told her what I had found. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Wandy, I am going to give you the name of my cousin. She is a family law attorney in Charlotte. You call her first thing tomorrow morning." I called her at 8 the next morning. Her name was Angela Torres. She was direct and calm, and she asked me very specific questions, and she listened to my answers without visible reaction, the way good attorneys do. She said, "I need you to do some things before we talk again." She gave me a list. Financial documents to find and photograph, account statements going back 2 years, any property records I could access, the beach house closing documents. I spent the next 4 days doing exactly what she asked. What I found during those 4 days reframed everything I had believed about my marriage. Derek had a savings account I did not know existed. I found it through a statement that had come to the house in his name that I had always assumed was related to one of our joint accounts. When I photographed it and sent it to Angela, she called me within an hour. She said, "Wandy, this account has been active for 3 years. There is currently $42,000 in it." I sat very still. She said, "This is in addition to the beach house, which he purchased using a separate line of credit he took out in his name only 6 months ago." I said, "He told me we did not have $7,500. She said, "I know." I said, "I put $2,700 on my own credit card. My mother gave me $800 she could not afford to give. Strangers donated money online for my son's medication." She said, "I know, Wandy." I said, "Well, he had $42,000 in an account I did not know about." She said, "Yes." I sat with that. Angela spoke carefully and clearly about what this meant legally, about what my rights were, about what the process looked like from here. She had seen versions of this before, she said, not identically, but in pattern. A spouse who controlled the finances, who created the appearance of scarcity while maintaining private wealth, who made decisions about shared assets without the other person's knowledge or consent. I asked her what I should do. She said, "That depends on what you want." I said, "I want my son to be safe. I want the truth. And I want to never be in a position again where I am calling my mother from a hospital hallway asking for $800 she cannot afford, while my husband has $42,000 sitting in a secret account." She said, "Then here is what we do." I confronted Derek on a Saturday afternoon when Mateo was at my mother's house for the weekend. I had everything ready. Angela had advised me on what to say and what not to say. I had made copies of everything. I was as prepared as a person can be for a conversation that has no good version. Derek came home from wherever he had been and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a single folder in front of me. He looked at the folder, then at me. He said, "What is this?" I said, "Sit down, Derek."
He sat. I opened the folder. I turned the first page toward him. The Sunset Beach closing documents. He looked at them. He said nothing. I said, "I want you to tell me about this." He said, "Wandy, that is an investment. It is a property investment that I have been planning for a long time, and the timing was right, and I made a business decision." I said, "You made a business decision the week our son was in the hospital?" He said, "The two things are not related." I said, "You told me we did not have $7,500. He said, "We did not have it liquid in our joint accounts." I said, "You had $42,000 in a personal savings account." The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He said, "How did you find that?" I said, "That is not the question we are discussing right now." I said, "You told me we did not have $7,500. He said, "We did not have it liquid in our joint accounts." I said, "You had $42,000 in a personal savings account." The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He said, "How did you find that?" I said, That is not the question we are discussing right now. He started to say something about how the account was for business purposes and how he had been planning to talk to me about it and how things were more complicated than they looked. I let him talk. I had learned from Angela not to argue, not to fill the space with my own emotion, just to let him talk and to listen. When he finished, I said, I want you to understand something clearly. While you had $42,000 in a private account and were closing on a beach house, I called my mother from a hospital hallway, and she gave me $800 from her retirement savings. I put $2,700 on a credit card in my own name. Strangers on the internet donated money for our son's medication. I looked at him across the kitchen table and I said, I will never forgive you for that. He looked like he wanted to say something. I said, I need you to leave the house for the weekend. I need space to think, and you need to understand that what happens next is not going to look like what you are imagining. He left within the hour. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. It was not an impulsive decision. Angela and I had talked through every aspect of it, the legal process, the financial implications, what it meant for Mateo, what I was entitled to under North Carolina law, including a portion of assets that had been accumulated during the marriage. Derek did not take it well initially. He hired his own attorney. He made arguments about the beach house being a business investment. He made arguments about the savings account being separate property. His attorney made those arguments to Angela. Angela dismantled them. She was extraordinary, calm and precise, and completely without the drama that Derek's side tried to introduce at every opportunity. The settlement took 8 months. It was not easy and it was not pleasant. And there were weeks where I was so exhausted I could barely function. But Angela had been right about what I was entitled to, and the final settlement reflected that. I will not share specific numbers because some things remain private. But I will tell you that I no longer have to worry about whether I can afford my son's medication. I will tell you that. Mateo is doing well. His follow-up appointments have all been positive. He is back in school, back in his routine, asking questions about everything, and laughing that laugh that belongs to my mother. He asks about his father. That is the part I navigate most carefully. Derek sees him on the schedule the court established. Mateo loves his father, as children do, with a completeness that does not require an explanation of adult failures. I do not speak badly about Derek to Mateo. That is a line I will not cross, regardless of what Derek did. But I am teaching my son, in every way I know how, what it looks like when someone shows up, when someone tells the truth, when someone chooses the people they love over the thing they want for themselves. I am teaching him by doing it. Every single day. I want to say something to every woman watching this who is in a marriage where one person controls the money and the other person trusts. Please hear me on this. Financial transparency is not a luxury. It is not something to negotiate away to avoid conflict. It is not something that only matters when things go wrong. It matters before things go wrong. It matters when everything seems fine. It matters especially when the person asking you not to look is someone you love and trust completely. Know where your money is. Know what accounts exist. Know what is being spent and saved and decided. Not because love requires suspicion, but because partnership requires truth. And truth requires access to the same information. I trusted Derek with our finances because I did not want to cause friction. That decision cost me a credit card debt, cost my mother $800 from her retirement, cost strangers money they donated because they saw a child who needed help. And it cost me a marriage, which in the end was not the loss I thought it would be. I also want to say something about the fundraiser. The people who donated to Mateo's GoFundMe, people I had not spoken to in years, and people I had never met at all, who gave money for a child they knew only from a photograph. I paid back every single person who gave to that fundraiser once the settlement came through. Every person who gave $20 or $50 or $100. I found them and I paid them back, and I wrote each of them a personal message. Most of them wrote back and said, "Please do not worry about it." I wrote back and said, "I know, but I needed to do this for myself and for Mateo, so he grows up knowing that when people extend grace, you honor it. That is the lesson I am most committed to teaching him." My name is Wandy Elias. I am 29 years old. My son was fighting for his life, and I needed $7,500. My husband said we did not have it. Then I found the beach house papers. Thank you for being here today. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone out there needs to know that finding out the truth, as devastating as it is always better than living inside the lie. Take care of yourselves, and take care of your finances.